Hello and welcome to Transformed. I'm your host, Josh McMullen, where we will discuss and explore topics, ideas on how to transform our current lives and being the person we need to be and the person God created us to be. So today I want to talk about getting out of the valley or getting unstuck, right? So like if you're familiar with the Bible, the valley in Psalms 23, where the valley of the shadow of death, right? Which a lot of time we find ourselves in, right? Especially if we're wanting to change and transform. It seems like a lot of the time we're coming out of a situation, out of a valley. The Bible also uses a lot of other examples like storms or in the cave, right? Or facing like a giant. There's a lot of other analogies we could use, but I like out of the valley. And also someone reached out and wanted to kind of go over this. So I love this idea because it really, change is so hard. It's probably the hardest thing we're ever going to do. And a lot of the time, change kind of happens when we're at our lowest points, right, in the valley, right, the low point of our lives. So again, whether the analogy is a storm, a trial, a valley, right, regardless, if we're going to try to change, right, it's going to be coming from one of those places. And a valley and a storm, any of those examples can either help us, like if we're in that valley, it's either going to promote change or it's going to continue just to crush us. So really, that's why I really like this idea, this topic, is because, when you're at the bottom, right, you can either stay at the bottom or you can decide to climb, decide to get out of the valley. So that's what I really wanted to start with the valley is, if your first part, I guess it's kind of like a first point here, I guess, would be if you're going to get out of the valley first, you're going to have to evaluate how you got to the valley. A lot of the time, a lot of people try to take off with change, right? Like, well, I'm going to, New Year's resolution, I'm going to lose 15 pounds or I'm going to read more books, right? Regardless of whatever your goal is or however you want to change, that you don't really evaluate your current situation, how you got there. So that's why I would say really step one is you're going to have to evaluate how you got into the valley. What decisions did you make? What errors did you have? What mistakes, what errors, what decisions led you to this point? Because if you don't evaluate it, then you're going to repeat it. And I guess that's the key. Is I found myself repeating so many same mistakes where it's like, you know what, you would go and work out halfway decent, but then you'd follow it up with, the dieting because I wasn't tackling the dieting aspect of it. So I think one, you got to evaluate how you got there, but the two, I think you got to evaluate what kind of valley you're in, right? So if you do your evaluation, right, definitely in a valley here, I'm definitely going through something. I think, and in my original episode, the first episode, I talked about mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. I really think those all kind of have their own valleys. Now, they're all interconnected, just like our health is, right? Emotional health is connected to physical, spiritual, mental. But I really feel like the valleys are connected, but they're also a little bit different, right? So, for example, like an emotional valley, you might be going through some anxiety, some depression, some anger, some worry, doubt, fear, or a nice mixed bag of all of those emotions. I know I had a mixed bag when I was going through, my valley, where I would be extremely angry. But I really feel like that anger was more of a mask for depression. So like I heard it one time stated that depression was just frozen anger. In that case, my depression really wasn't at frozen. It was more like on fire, just kind of raging out of control. So we might go through different things, right? Anxiety, worry, anger, that emotional valley, which can, again, lead to a lot of other valleys. You might not be able to think as clear, right? So it might feed into a mental valley where your decision-making is not as clear and easy, right? You start maybe lacking a little bit of that mental toughness that we talked about last week, or might have some lack of self-control, lack of willpower, maybe some self-doubt or some negative views start to creep in, right? So if you're starting to feel, for me, starting to feel depressed, starting to feel angry, starting to have that really low value of self-worth. And then now next thing you know, it's like, okay, now that's some low self-esteem, that's some low negative thinking. I know that's something that, even to be honest with you, I still struggle today, is really having a low self view of where I've came from. It's not like I think I've mentioned it before, but sometimes the mirror and the scale, like I feel like they're wrong because of how I'm seeing myself, and I think just sometimes you have that battling confidence, right? That mental battle of no, one day I'll have like this high self confidence where I'm like, yeah, I look really really good, and then it could be an angle, it could be maybe the lighting's wrong, I don't know, and then next thing you know, you're kind of diving down a little bit in terms of, well, maybe I didn't come as far as I think I did. So there's a lot of negative views that you can start to get, and you really start to lose that mental battle with confidence and esteem, and really kind of start to get yourself in a mental valley then because of your emotions, right? Because of that emotional valley, right? It starts to kind of dig a little deeper and get, and start messing with your mental valley. Also, physical valleys can actually be an obstacle for us as well. Also feed into everything else, but it could be the injuries we suffer. It could be the jobs we're in. Physical valleys could also be like an actual physical environment. So it actually could be the people we surround ourselves with, or our physical surroundings, jobs, the people in our lives, our actual physical looks and physical health. Obviously, one of my really obvious, I think the physical valleys are typically obvious, right? Like you can see someone's burnout at work. You can see they're frustrated with maybe their coworkers or family, loved ones. Maybe you're overweight, right? Obviously, I was overweight. So that's a physical valley. That's pretty obvious. I think the physical valley are again, I mean, that definitely can play into the other ones too, right? You just get burnt out, right? And then it kind of gets into your emotional valleys and mental valleys. See, it's all kind of like they're all connected, but they're all also have their own moment, right? You might be in a job that you're not really, that fond of. You might have went to school for a few years and realized what you went for is not what you want to do, right? So that kind of leads into the, emotions. But, for me, obviously I was overweight, but also I had a few physical valleys in terms of injuries. In early of 2019, I got into a couple car accidents, I luckily really no one got hurt, but, I got rear-ended and, kind of banged my neck up a little bit, nothing too bad. And then when I started my master's degree, I was playing basketball and like my knee kind of got, banged up a little bit, nothing too bad, but then obviously the biggest one for me, injury-wise, would be I tore my pectoral muscle in the beginning of the year, late February of this year. So, you can go through physical valleys, which can, again, lead to emotional valleys. I think, growing up, definitely seeing how physical valleys, physical trials, physical storms can really affect your life if, you don't take some of the steps that we're going to go over. The last part here, spiritual valleys. So I think this one is kind of, another, it's not an obvious one in terms of, right, not like the physical valleys where we can just kind of be on the street and see something or be around somebody and kind of know what they're going through. Spiritual valleys can be the sins that we're in, and a lot of time we try to hide the sins, right? Like for me, obviously hiding the food addiction was hard, but like porn addiction or some other addictions, you're trying to hide them a little bit, So the sins that we find ourselves in, the ability to control our emotions, the sins that we find ourselves in when we're angry. So again, they're all connected, right? When I was angry, I would definitely be sinning because of the emotions and how I would use my emotions. Not anger in itself. A lot of that stuff isn't necessarily a sin, but it can lead to sin if we don't control it and don't know where to take those emotions. So, kind of just noted through here, I went through several valleys with whether it's car accidents, the knee injury, the shoulder injury. I think COVID is kind of a valley. I know I went through like a mental valley with COVID where it's like, well, if the world is ending, I'm going to eat what I want. I had these awesome powdered sugar donuts every day and Oreos, which is my popular example. That March, April, I gained 40 pounds, when COVID first hit, just because I'm like, I'm gonna eat like the world is ending. And then, like May hit and everything kind of started to calm down. It's like, the scale is not good. So, I mean, we all go through our valleys. I went through several of them. We really, you got to evaluate how you got there. You got to evaluate which valley you're in. Maybe you're in a couple valleys. Like I said, maybe you're in a mixed bag of valleys and storms and trials right now. But I think you got to evaluate how you got there first in order to fix how you're going to apply, have that growth moving forward. And then really just wanted to do a side note before we really jump in is just another thing that I've learned just even through reading the Bible, right, is sometimes the valleys and the trials and temptations in our lives follow victories. So look at Elijah, right? He defeated the prophets of Baal and then was on the run for his life, right? Terrified that he was going to be killed. Peter was declared to be the rock of the church, right? And then right after that, Satan rebukes him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." And then Jesus is actually baptized and then is, like in that same chapter, later tempted by Satan, right? When he's in the desert. So a lot of the spiritual victories, whether it's spiritual or just normal victories that we feel, can also sometimes lead to temptation, right? Can lead to potential downfall. And I think, so one, in your evaluation, realize that, hey, you're going to have some victories. You're going to have some moments where you're going to have temptation. But what you do with those temptations, right? What you do with those trials and valleys after those victories is really, right, it defines the whole Bible, is going to really define our lives. So first, like I've said before, is I'm a Christian, right? So the first focus that we should have is on Jesus, right? So going back to Peter, is when Jesus was on the water in the storm, right? And he calls out to his disciples, and Peter, says, Lord, if you ask me to come, I'll come. And Jesus says for him to come, and so he gets out on the water, right? And then he gets distracted by the waves and starts to sink and cries out for Jesus to save him. So I think the first part is what we got to stay focused on Jesus. I think it would have been. I mean, imagine if he didn't get distracted by the waves, if he just kept focusing on Jesus, how that story would have ended. So I think a lot of the time, a lot of the stress and a lot of the waves and a lot of the storms in our lives can be overcome. We can get through them if we just kept our focus on Jesus. And again, didn't say when Peter stepped out that the storm would go away and the waters would be calm, right? But if we would have focused on him, he would have gotten through those waves. He would have gotten through that storm. So I think just the first part is we just really got to focus on Jesus, throughout the entire thing, right? Throughout our trials, throughout our victories, throughout our storms, whatever analogy you want to put on it, focus on Jesus, and really the rest kind of falls into place. And over the last 15, 16 months, really since I've had this, in my opinion, God has really transformed my life. Really, it started with that. It started with focusing on Jesus. The weight loss and all that other stuff is great. I got my master's degree in the beginning of the year. A lot of that stuff is awesome. I'm really happy I was able to lose weight and able to get my master's degree and grow my insurance business. But all that, I think, was very secondary, and a lot of that stuff wouldn't have happened, especially all together had I not focused on Jesus, had I not had Jesus first in my life. I really I don't think I would have lost the weight. I don't think I would have overcame any addiction, any anger, any emotional problems. Right, those would have just continued, and that feeds into how you process information. It feeds into your relationships. Life would have been a lot harder, and I don't think I would have had the accomplishments. Or wouldn't have been able to do anything had I not had Jesus first in my life. And I truly believe that. So I think the first step is have Jesus first in your life, and the rest is going to fall into place for your priorities, and it's going to help you get through the storms. So focus on Jesus, not the waves. And then second, I think we can ask God to help us through the storm. not just to get us out. I think a lot of the time we try to, hey God, I really want to